here, but my mom's a teacher and she taught me how to speak clearly and loudly enough. So if you do have any questions or like have any problems hearing us, just let me know and I can pass the mic to everyone. But I'm pretty sure everyone here, and it's a kind of condensed space. But welcome and thank you for joining us for our housing justice conversation. My name is Latoya McKay. I am the Fair Housing Specialist with Economic Action Maryland Fund. So I run our fair housing program. We help to advocate for families who are facing housing discrimination, as well as look into different ways that we can help push that economic value and help towards that the advancement of fair housing. So a lot of times we hear about it, but nothing is actually being done. So today we have a panelist of experts who are going to dive into more specific criteria or specific areas of the housing industry in regards to like mortgage issues as well as foreclosures. We're also looking at tenant issues and tenant advocacy issues, and then we're looking at more of a advocacy standpoint as well. I'll have the panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit of what you guys do, and then we'll get started, okay? Everybody good? I love when you talk back to me, so. Thank you. We're all good. Thank you. Elise.
Well, no one ever told me they couldn't hear me, but if you need me to speak louder, let me know. I'm Elise Cohen. I direct the federal housing work that we do at the National Consumer Law Center. It's primarily homeownership related, from getting into homeownership to staying in homeownership and everything around that, including issues around heirs property and other things. I mostly work at the federal level, but I'm also lucky enough to be on the board of Economic Action Maryland. And really the work that I do is only meaningful because of all the work you all do, so thank you for having me today.
I'm Carol Osh, I'm the Tenant Advocacy Director. I run the Tenant Advocacy Program, and we take complaints and deal with issues from tenants statewide. And currently, as of yesterday, for the year of our Lord 2025, we have over 600 clients, almost 620. Their incomes range from 0 to 16.5 million. So that should show you that housing issues, particularly substandard issues, which is my specialty, don't discriminate. A ceiling collapsing, the ceiling doesn't care how much you earn every year. The landlord that owns that ceiling and should be responsible, a lot of them don't care either. So that's primarily what we deal with. We don't do a lot of eviction work simply because there are legal services programs out there for people who are currently experiencing or will experience evictions. So we have a lot of substandard housing, as I said, and we have a lot of leases that I do lease reviews for our clients, and a lot of them contain illegal lease clauses. I had one recently where it said if there's, if it has to go to court, there's an issue between the landlord and the tenant, that it has to be in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and no. I have an aunt who's judge in Pennsylvania, and so I called her just, surreptitiously, hey, and no ma'am, you keep that mess down there in Maryland. So, we try to do the best for our clients, but in these challenging political times, shall we say, and challenging economic times, there's not the help out there that there used to be. So multitasking is what I do the most, I think.
My name is Vaughn Stewart. I am a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. I represent District 19, which is the middle part of Montgomery County, including most excitingly Leisure World, and also at places like Aspen Hill and Glenmont and parts of Rockville. And my spare time, I'm also a consumer lawyer at Santoni Bacci and Ortega up in Timonium, where we sue all the bad guys, all the corporations who try to prey on vulnerable consumers. So it's a nice, cool double role for me. And congratulations, because I think you guys picked the best panel during this afternoon.
I'd like to add just one thing, if I may, because it was in the news recently that the Attorney General garnered a settlement for some tenants in Prince George's County, and it actually was a record settlement of $11 million for these tenants who were living in horrific conditions. And we, along with the NAACP and a few other groups, were involved in that. That's what we do.
Well, I appreciate you guys introducing yourselves. So as you hear, we have a panel of experts, in my opinion, that know pretty much the best things that you could get the information from. So we're gonna go and delve in a little bit more into what they know and the knowledge that they can provide to us. We're gonna start off with Elise, and I know that she has a plethora of notes here to educate us. No, it's fine. Listen, to educate us on some of the federal levels of the housing industry.
So homeownership and rental issues are really so different. I'm gonna focus primarily, as I said, on the homeownership issues. Really, thank you for having me, because the work that you all do is just so important. And if I can give you a little more homework today to take with you on whatever you're going to do next, thank you for your consideration. Just a little context first. In Maryland, the black homeownership rate in early 2025 was just over 50%, and the white homeownership rate was almost 80%. And so the racial wealth gap that Director Chopra was just talking about before in the previous session is real. It's actually slightly less bad in Maryland than it is in some other places, and it's still truly, truly horrific and terrible. The other factoid I wanted to share is nationwide, if someone has a household expense of $400, 1/3 of households don't have the money to cover a $400 emergency expense. And so that's who we're talking about today, and asking ourselves, what can we do to keep them stably housed, whether they live in a home they purchased, whether they inherited their home, whether they're renting, whatever their situation is. And so with that, I'm going to sort of jump in with some information about what's going on at the national level. And the main thing I know you all know is that a few months makes a really big difference. A few months ago, we were trying to think about how to expand language access in the mortgage market, and now there are ICE raids within 2 blocks of my house in any direction. A few months ago, we were trying to figure out how to make that racial wealth gap smaller and how to promote access to the mortgage market for all populations, how to affirmatively further for housing. And now we're seeing rollbacks of language access, of disparate impact enforcement for race discrimination, and really rollbacks of anything that has to do with racial equity. A few months ago, we were trying to get better rules for people who have inherited homes to access disaster assistance. And now we're hoping that we'll have a FEMA to provide disaster assistance. A few months ago, we were talking about black homeownership and homeownership in communities of color, and there were lots of really great ideas about how to fund access into the market, especially for first-time home buyers. And now we're being told that that goal is itself suspect, and we cannot talk about it out loud if we get federal funds. We were looking for funding for new programs to help people with down payment assistance, and now we have a federal budget that's cutting back on really all essential services for all the communities we care about. Director Chopra talked about one of my favorite topics, which is mortgage servicing, a little nerdy. Once you have a mortgage, you have to keep making your payments. And so it's not just about getting into the home, it's about staying in the home once you've already got the mortgage. And people hit bumps in the road. And so the question is, how will the mortgage servicer help you get an affordable payment when you hit a bump in the road? And there are some pretty good rules coming, especially out of COVID, that are better. And we thought a few months ago that we'd be making those rules better. Now we're expecting a big rollback. And when that announcement of a rollback happens, we're gonna ask all of you to write letters to the CFPB, as it is now and will be in the coming months, to tell them that that's the wrong thing to do. Other things that are different, there was a lot of momentum on junk fees for renters, and now there's very little activity at the federal level. There was also a lot of money and energy around helping people make their homes more energy efficient. Why does that matter in all communities? Because it lowers your utility bills in a lot of cases. That money has disappeared, the programs have disappeared, and utility costs are not going to be going down for all kinds of reasons. We were also going to push for more consumer protections for loans to make homes energy efficient at the federal level, and now we can't do that anymore. And as Director Chopra also mentioned, there are a lot of products that are loans trying to pretend they're not loans. Why? Because if you're a loan, you're subject to a lot of laws. But if you're not a loan, you don't have to follow those laws. So in housing, the big one is called home equity investment loans. And home equity investment loans work like this. You own your house, and you want some money, and you have some equity in your house, and this company says, we'll loan you this amount of money in exchange, not for an interest rate, but a percentage of the amount that your home increases in value, which could be a lot more than the amount of money they're lending you, or an even more than a high interest rate would be. And you don't know how much it's going to be when you borrow the money, only at the end. And if the money is due in 10 years and you don't have that money, then you have to sell your house. So those are the kinds of things that are growing right now, while there's nobody in Washington trying to do anything about it. What have we been doing in Washington? Well, we've been protesting a lot. There were a lot of protests outside the CFPB, at HUD, really the whole government. I assume many of you have been to a protest or 3 about that. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau started rolling back cases that they had brought, including one against a company for kickbacks to real estate brokers. That was against Rocket Homes, related to Rocket Mortgage. And also against a company that sets up families to fail on their mortgage loans when they take out a loan for their manufactured home. Those are the poorest homeowners in America, and they rolled back that case. One of the commissioners of the Federal Trade Commission is still trying to keep her job. There were 2 Democrats who were fired, and the Supreme Court said, no, you don't have to let her regain her job while she litigates it. We're gonna put all of that on hold. And in the CFPB litigation that we're doing right now, NCLC is one of the plaintiffs trying to save the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We had some good early results, and then the appellate court said, no, you don't have to hold off on firing most of the people who work there while you litigate whether you're allowed to fire those people. You can fire them and then decide later whether they should have been retained. And so we're waiting to see whether there'll be a whole panel to rehear that case in the federal court, but I just wanted to read to you from the dissent from one of the judges. She said, the majority does not deny that defendants acted as the district court found. The majority are the people who said, yes, you can fire everybody. Nor do my colleagues dispute that such actions were unlawful for all the reasons that the plaintiff has alleged. Nevertheless, they elect to shield defendants' illegality from any effective judicial oversight. The defendants announced and celebrated their lawless decision to reporters and the broader public. But there has been some good news. There was a law that passed both houses of Congress on trigger leads. If someone applies for a mortgage, suddenly the credit bureaus sell their data to every company that's interested, and then people get a lot of credit offers, which really makes them very vulnerable. And so not in Maryland, at the US level, nationally, that's not going to be allowed anymore, except under very, very limited circumstances. So when you apply for a mortgage, you won't get an envelope every 5 hours offering you more credit. The Senate also voted out of committee a very large housing bill. It has a lot of good things in it, including provisions to prevent discrimination in home appraisals. It helps people who have rural mortgage loans when they hit a bump in the road, and it makes permanent the disaster relief program at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. 2 minutes? Oh, okay. Also, there was a bill that passed to help veterans when they have a mortgage and they hit a bump in the road. They have separate rules for VA mortgage loans. And the mortgage program that helped those people who were facing a hardship was canceled 2 years ago with no replacement. And we've been working for a long time to try to get that, and we just got a bill passed miraculously, and it should be up and running soon, hopefully. So we're pushing back at the federal level on all the things that you know are going on, and we hope that when you hear from us and ask you to act, that you can work with us on those things, because we all really have to work together. But it's really an opportunity to get a few things done at the state level. So I have 3 homework assignments for Maryland. 1, your tax foreclosure system is still not really in compliance with the Supreme Court's recent decision about how they should work. Essentially, if someone owes $2,000 in taxes and they have $100,000 in equity in their home, and their home is sold to collect that $2,000, the rest of that money should go to the homeowner. And Maryland's system doesn't allow for that. And in Baltimore, there's currently litigation, and the court recently found that the case could move forward. So fingers crossed, and we need to work on that. Second, those home equity investment loans I described, they are gonna come to Maryland, and you have some protections, but not enough. So we have lots of information about that. I've already sent them to Delegate Stewart. And we think that you should work on that. And lastly, rental junk fees. Maryland has good laws about screening fees at the front end, but not about all of the junk fees that renters can be charged. Montgomery County does have a more comprehensive law, and so the homework assignment is to attach the Montgomery County rules to the whole state. I want to end by just saying one thing, which is Aziz Huq wrote an article in The Atlantic that I can't really stop talking about. It was based on a book that was written by a Jewish labor lawyer during World War II. And it was about what it was like to be a lawyer during a time of fascism. And what he said was that it was a dual state. There's the normative state where some people can go about their lives as if their lives are normal. And then there's the prerogative state, where people who are subject to the power of government or corporations don't have the freedom to lead the lives they're trying to lead. And so what we're all here for is to try to get rid of that prerogative state and to make it one state where everyone has the right to lead a life of dignity. Onward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know for me as a service provider, some of this information was shocking as well as informative, especially that on the home equity investment. Also,
Yeah,
are we talking about HELOCs?
No.
No, this is different.
This is the
Okay.
rival to HELOCs.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I had no idea that was a thing, and that's terrifying.
Gotcha, I appreciate that clarity. So now, we've heard on a federal level, and for next, we wanna look at the issues that are being faced on the ground for those who are advocating for these tenants, who are face to face on a daily basis. And I think, Carol, you are the expert in that area.
Wow.
Especially, I mean, I work closely with you, and I am always shocked to hear some of the stories and the successes that you've had. So if you would take a couple minutes
Sure.
and express that for us.
So something I was thinking about yesterday, and I said, oh, I should bring this up during the panel discussion. I had a call with two women from Baltimore County DHCD. Baltimore County is one of our funders. They give a lot of money for fair housing, and they toss me a little money too. So we had a wonderful call. It was super productive. But the whole way through the call, we kept saying, oh yeah, that program isn't available anymore. You know, it was available maybe a few months ago, but no. And then it just kept sort of snowballing during the call. And, you know, one of the women said, really, Carol, the thing you have to keep in mind right now, today, we're all we've got. And normally when people would say something like that to me, I'd kind of laugh and brush it off, but I realize she's right. You know, here in Maryland, we're very privileged in a lot of ways to live in a state that we've got it a lot better than some other states, let's just say. Not to point fingers at any other states, but we've got it a lot better. And we really are all we have. And so if I could urge you to do anything after this panel, after today, is really get involved in your local and state politics. I mean, we always hear, you know, local matters or local is the most important. And it's never been more important than right now, because, you know, we cannot rely on the federal government to do the right thing. We can rely on them to do things, but not the right thing. And we have to really band together to ensure that tenants' rights are protected, because the vast majority of my clients are Black women with children. And the vast majority of those women are very low, non-existent income to low-ish moderate income. And they're scared. You know, fear, I was telling somebody earlier today, fear is not something that comes naturally to me. Anger, yes, you know, but not fear. But I'm starting to really worry, not about myself or my family, because we're doing okay, but for my clients. Where are people going to go when landlords have an unfair advantage when they're setting their rents, they're using algorithms, they're using tenant application data in ways that they've never used before, because the technology did not exist when I was in my 20s, 30s looking for an apartment or whatever. It was the landlord either liked you or they didn't. But now there's all this technology that's being programmed by people who maybe don't have the best of intentions when it comes to racial equity. And so we're finding a lot of tenants living in apartments that they simply can't afford. When I compare their income that they self-report on our intake form versus what they're paying in rent, sometimes I just look at my screen and I'm like, how? I know what I make and I couldn't even afford that. And I make double what you make. Like, how? And you've got 2 kids. So you're having to clothe and feed. And as a mom of a son, you know, I know how much kids eat, a lot. And so, you know, hats off to these women, and I make sure to tell each and every one of them, I want you to be surrounded by support while you're going through this. So even if you just want to send me emails and yell at me, hey, fine. If you don't have anybody else to yell at, and please don't yell at your kids, you know, yell at me, because right now you got to get it out somehow. But we all have to put pressure on our state and local governments to stop looking at tenants as less than. Because let me tell you something. That person I told you about, that they have a household income of $16.5 million a year, they are not less than. income-wise, they are way more than. And so, but they're running into the same issues that my low and moderate income clients are running into. So we need to put pressure on our state and local legislators to ensure that tenants are seen as valued consumers, valued residents, valued people. Because a lot of times they're not even seen as people. They're not even seen as human beings. People, you go to your neighborhood, your community meeting, and people talk about, oh, the renters. The renter. Well, you know what? The renters are paying the property taxes on that property that they're living in. The landlord pays that money to the state and the city or the county, whomever. But ultimately, the tenants are paying those property taxes. They are not less than. They don't take, they contribute. And so we need to change the narrative around tenants. We need to change the dynamic around, oh, the poor mom and pop landlords. Oh, but boo-hoo, they're just small-time landlords. They're not these big corporations. Well, you know what? 99% of the small-time landlords that I get complaints about, they're forcing their tenants to live in substandard housing, including the black children and moms that I spoke of earlier. They're living in lead paint-filled homes in Baltimore City. But we want to talk about how the lead paint issue, well, it's kind of gone away since now all children are tested. No, it hasn't gone away. It has not gone away. In fact, it's gotten worse since the 1990s when Johns Hopkins and Kennedy Krieger intentionally poisoned children with lead to figure out a way to fix it. And these were black children, may I add, babies and toddlers. These were not white children that this happened to. And so we need to change the narrative, and we need to start having honest, open discussions. Instead of all this Democrats love to feel good, hold hands, kumbaya. No. We need to be open and honest about who we really serve and why we serve them and why we have to serve them. My mom was a social worker years and years ago. She told me, I think I was still in high school, and she told me that as a social worker, her job is to work herself out of a job, not to perpetuate the conditions that sent her clients to her in the first place. And that's what I have tried to do for many, many years, probably too many years at this point. I mean, you could tell. See what I said about the anger? But that's what I try to do. I don't need this job to continue into the next few decades. You've got me until February the 6th, 2038, and then peace out. So I want this problem, I want to be able to make real inroads in fixing these issues. And I can't do it by myself. I can't do it with just our mayor or just the people on this panel. I need everybody to get on board with changing the narrative, changing the focus, and truly doing the work instead of all this. And so on that note, I'm going to stop doing this and hand it over to Delegate Stewart, who, by the way, is a great delegate.
And Delegate, before you start, I do see that there are some antsy questions that are probing your minds as we go. We will have an opportunity for question and answers. But again, I just want to thank Carol because it's always a pleasure to see the amount of passion that you put behind your work.
Oh, I'm about to cry. I'm about to cry.
Listen, I'm so motivated. I'm just and it is an honor to work under you as well. But now we're going to move on with Delegate Stewart, and he has shared his expertise, not only as an advocate, but as, all the things that you do.
As one of the best tenant lawyers in the state.
Thank you. I promise I did not pay Carol any money. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you all. Really awesome for me me to be on this panel with such dedicated people and to be in this room with so many dedicated people. I think that the layout of the conference is cool in that we all got inspired by Director Chopra and the women sitting to my right. And what I'm hoping to do is provide you with a general sense of what your representatives in Annapolis have been up to in the past and what kind of bills that we might be putting forward in the upcoming session, so you can think, first of all, about things you may want to get involved in helping with if you're not already engaged on some of these issues, and also think about where we're not doing everything we need to. What are some other ideas? Because we've still got time before January to put bills in, to come up with new ideas, so help us fill in the gaps for where we are not touching every issue we need to on the issue of housing. So first, let me just say that it's obvious that we are living through a housing crisis in Maryland, and corporate greed is making it worse. And yeah, we need more homes, but we also need to stop the junk fees and the predatory pricing. We need to stop the algorithmic price fixing, and we need to stop the lobbying muscle in Annapolis that has turned a basic human need into a Wall Street profit center. And so that's where you come in. And so, I think, every time we try to tip the scales in Annapolis, and we have made, I think, enormous progress over the last few years. We've probably done more in, say, the last 5 or 6 years since I've been in Annapolis, or like the last 5 or 6 years I've been in Annapolis, than we probably did in the previous 50 or 60 years combined on issues related to renters and consumers, because there was a narrative in Annapolis for a long time that those were not really issues for the state legislature to get involved with. The locals did housing. We just sort of needed to stay out of it and let landlords and tenants contract with each other as if that was a fair, level playing field. And it's really only been recently, thanks to a lot of people in this room, that we have organized and gotten our shit together to fight back against a lot of the powers that be in Annapolis, who for decades got what they want. And they're spooked. They're scared. They realize that we're on the march. If you guys could be on the fly on the wall at their meetings, you could realize how scared they are and how they feel like the ground is slipping out from under them. That doesn't mean that our work is done. Yes, we are better than a lot of states and better than a lot of our neighbors, but we still live in a state which is the wealthiest state and the wealthiest country that the world has ever known. And yet we live in a state where over 50% of renters are cost burdened. We live in a state where one junk fee could be the difference between someone having a paycheck spread across their other expenses or not. We can do a lot more to provide dignity and respect, and we've been trying, and sometimes we succeed and sometimes we fail, and I'm going to mention a few bills now that we worked on to give you guys a sense of how you can be active. I guess first, before I do that, I just want to say kind of what are the top issues that we've been trying to address in Annapolis in the last few years. Again, some of y'all will know this. First is habitability. It's come up before. It's obviously a passion project for Carol, and myself too. But we have way too many families and children in Maryland who wake up every morning having to dodge roaches and rats and mold and sewage. We have disabled tenants who need elevators to get to work in the morning and get to their home at night, but they have to sleep in the common areas of the building because none of the elevators in the building work. That happens every day. Every day, little girls and little boys in Maryland wake up with roaches crawling on them, with rodents that are running at their feet as they try to shower and get ready in the morning. And we just let it happen. By we, I mean my colleagues and I in Annapolis. We abide that. We know that it's happening. And because those neighbors are not really our neighbors, for the most part, we let it happen. And it's gross. And it's unconscionable. And we have tried to do better on it. So a couple of years ago, we passed a bill that I sponsored and that we worked on for several years with a lot of folks in this room called the Tenant Safety Act that was meant to bolster our rent escrow process and level the playing field a little bit between tenants and landlords. Now, there are other people in this room. There are some people in this room, looking at Jonathan, for example, at CASA, who will tell you that the Tenant Safety Act is already working. And there are probably many other people, including people like Carol, that will tell you that we need to do a lot more to rebalance the habitability fold than just taking a victory lap with the Tenant Safety Act. So I'm hoping that we'll continue to march forward on that issue. The second, and this has been a part of my legal practice as well, I've seen a lot of this. I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of this. Tenant screening inaccuracies.
Yes.
People, I think if you're not on the ground, or if you're not a renter, or you're not talking to renters a lot, this is an issue that doesn't sound super sexy. But the reality is that...
Can you say what it is?
Yeah, sorry. So when you apply for an apartment, landlords contract with tenant screening companies. These are credit reporting agencies by another name. So they're kind of like a version of TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax, except they're dodgier. They're shadier. A lot of times they're it's like two 25-year-olds who went to like Tulane and like live in their parents' basement. Like they're like fraternity brothers, and they want to like create some some sort of small business. And so they just buy one AI software to scrape data from public records, eviction data. They buy another AI software to translate that eviction data into something that looks pretty, and then they sell those reports, that pretty looking report, to landlords, and then tenants pay $25, $50 an application fee to go to their landlord that then flows to those frat bros in their parents' basement. There are a lot of problems with this system, but the number one problem is that these reports are very, very often inaccurate. I see it all the time. My law firm has several class actions on this topic, but what ends up happening is landlords file bogus eviction actions against tenants for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's a paperwork error where they think that they owed a junk fee they didn't actually owe, and they charge them. Sometimes a tenant was lawfully withholding rent or putting their money into rent escrow, but an eviction proceeding is filed against them, even though they're not living in habitable conditions. There's a million reasons why faulty eviction proceedings are filed, but thousands of them are filed a year. And a lot of them are dismissed, rightly. Some of them eventually aren't. Sometimes people are kicked out for illegal reasons, but a lot of times those are dismissed, but they stay on people's records. And we passed a bill from Delegate Terry Hill a few years ago to provide an outlet for shielding or screening those reports when they don't yield a landlord victory, when they're dismissed. The problem is when you apply, these AI software companies and these tenant screening companies have already scraped the data. So it doesn't matter that they're later shielded or later screened. They already have it in their repository, and their AI software, which is not checked by any humans, oftentimes translates an eviction proceeding where the landlord lost into big red letters on a tenant screening report to the next landlord that says eviction. No eviction took place. In fact, it was thrown out because it was predatory, and yet now those scarlet letters follow around the tenant for the next decade, and they can't find another home. And so guess what? Now they're trapped. They're living with all those rats and roaches that I talked about. Well, now they have to keep living there because they can't find any other place to accept them. So that pairing of habitability and tenant screening, faulty tenant screening, oftentimes, and sometimes accurate tenant screening that uses, for example, credit scores from voucher holders. That's another big problem that's related. We're seeing landlords ask for tenant screening to get credit information, credit data, credit scoring from tenants whose vouchers cover their rent. Why would you need to know their tenant's credit score for someone for whom Section 8 vouchers are covering the entirety of their rent or almost the entirety of their rent? So that's the second issue. Third issue has been mentioned by both of my fellow panelists, junk fees. This is a huge, huge growing problem. This is actually, the landlords have a term for this, by the way. They don't like the term junk fees, believe it or not. They like to use the term ancillary income. And it's the hot topic at all their conferences. They don't let me go to their conferences, but I like to read who the panelists are, what they talk about, what the topics are. And right now the big hot topic is how can you squeeze more out of ancillary income? Because at the end of the day, you can only increase the rent so much because you've got competitors, right? Like we do still live in kind of a market system in housing. So you can't increase the rent too much. So how do you squeeze a little bit extra profit out? It's junk fees. So this is things like technology packages, valet trash services, billing convenience fees, credit card, so the list goes on and on and on. This is their latest profit center, and we've got to shut it down because every junk fee is just money that's basically taking from the tenant's wallet into the corporate machine for no reason. And also, to make matters worse, a lot of times they tack these junk fees on, not even in the advertisement for the unit. So then you pay your application fee, maybe you're denied, maybe you're accepted, and then you realize that the $1,400 a month, one-bedroom apartment you thought you were getting is actually an $1,800 a month apartment once they tack on all the fees. And now it's out of your price range, but you've already paid your application fee, and no, they're not giving it back. So, and then the third issue is just kind of broadly, and I don't need to really go into this because everyone knows, I mean, the rent is too damn high. We just have an overall rent affordability crisis. And so, I mean, what I would say is the shortage of housing here is a problem. The shortage of housing is the spark, but corporate greed is the gasoline. And together, we have to collectively try to put out the fire before it burns down more families' lives. And so I'll briefly run through some bills. I know I'm probably running out of time. So first, Delegate Vogel had a junk fee bill last year that he will likely bring back this year that stopped some of these practices that I'm talking about. But maybe he could go further, and maybe he needs some help from people in this room on how to make it better. I'm going to put in a tenant screening transparency bill this session for the first time, addressing some of these issues I'm talking about, including reasons for why a tenant's denied, the types of screening the tenants that landlords use before the tenant pays the application fee, requiring landlords to attach the tenant screening report to the adverse action letter so that tenants don't have to run down the guys in the basement, because a lot of times they don't have websites and they make you call them a million times to even get your tenant screening report in the first place. And then, most crucially, as I previewed, no shielded or screened data should be going into tenant screening reports. Third, Delegate Dana Jones, another great delegate, has a zombie mortgage bill going after debt buyers. She's going to be bringing that back. I want to put that on people's radar. I'm going to do a bill this upcoming session requiring landlords to at least allow one type of way to pay rent that has no junk fee attached. Right now we see landlords that say, no, you can't pay by cash. No, you can't pay by check. You can pay by card, but we charge a 45% credit card fee, right? There's got to be at least one way to pay your rent. Landlords say they want people to pay rent, right? And yet they make it as hard as possible because they use that as yet another source of their precious ancillary income. Next, Delegate Mary Lehman, another friend of mine, is going to bring back her bill to require to take Montgomery County and Prince George's laws, expanded through the rest of the state around air conditioning.
Yes.
Habitability should include breathable air in the summer, right?
Yes.
Habitability should include no infants having to sleep in cribs where the temperature is 90 plus degrees. Seems obvious, and yet this has been a really difficult bill to get over the finish line the last couple of years. My colleague and good friend who's with us, Delegate Terraza, if you can wave, is hopefully going to finish the fight on the issue of tenant possession recovery. We made a big win last year by providing more notice before tenants' evictions, and now we have to finish the battle here, which is to, I think, comply with what the courts have said, which is to provide a tenant possession recovery period, because the reality is that you can't really get lower, in my opinion. You can't really get less dignified in kicking someone out, oftentimes for illegal reasons, and then putting all their shit on the street.
Yeah.
I mean, to Carol's point about treating people as subhuman, to me that is the perfect encapsulation of how big corporations in Maryland, and sometimes small corporations in terms of the mom and pop landlords, treat people who rent their homes like they are not fully human. Because their belongings, the kids' toys, all these sentimental values, military items, all these things, they do not give a shit. They will throw it in the puddles. They do not care.
And just to interrupt
Please do.
real quick, think about also documents, birth certificates, social security cards, the documentation that you don't carry around with you on the regular. All of that stuff. I've had so many clients say to me, now I have to go get another social security card. I have to get my children's birth certificates. I can't register them for school. All that stuff. It's not just your stuff and your sentimental items. It's, all those really important things that we're all required to have. And as Delegate Stewart said, they get thrown in the puddle and there they go.
So please give Delegate Terraza a pat on the back as you exit today and offer to help her out, try to get that over the finish line. I'll go faster now. So I'm gonna eliminate what's called an administrative exhaustion requirement for filing housing discrimination claims. I know that's lawyer speak, but basically I don't think that you should have to go through any administrative agency before you file a lawsuit for housing discrimination. We shouldn't be putting more barriers up for people to be able to sue people for being racially discriminatory or gender-based discrimination in housing. We should make it easier for those lawsuits to happen. We shouldn't make it harder. There's no federal requirement for that, and yet Maryland has an administrative exhaustion requirement for those kinds of lawsuits. On the same topic of fair housing, Delegate Sandy Bartlett has a bill that I used to have that she's worked a lot on with Marceline around fair housing testing and about you being able to remove Maryland's two-party consent rules around videoing housing providers who are violating fair housing discrimination with videotape, because that's the best example. And it also protects the landlords, because then it's not a he said, she said thing. We have the video. Delegate Polakovich Carr, who you heard from earlier, who's also one of my closest friends in Annapolis and who received an award earlier, she and I have been working on algorithmic price fixing legislation. It didn't pass last year. And in fact, the landlords treated it, the landlords, and when they got up at the hearing, treated it like it was laughable that we even want to regulate this. We need a lot more help on that issue. It's obvious to me that it's just the 21st century version of price fixing, but the idea that we would want to regulate this to them is insane, Marxism. And so I'll conclude by just saying that, we talked about these problems. Here are just some of the solutions. I want to hear more about your solutions, but none of this gets done without you. It's not enough for us to introduce bills. It's not enough for me and Delegate Vogel and Delegate Terraza and Delegate Polakovich-Carr to just file this paperwork. Ultimately, these battles aren't won. These reforms don't happen unless you bring your stories. You come down to Annapolis to testify. You email every legislator that you've ever even heard of, and every legislator who will listen, and including legislators who won't listen, as Marceline said before. I would just conclude by saying every time a tenant is denied housing because of a faulty screen report, that's not just a paperwork error. That's a family without a home. Right. Every time you have a landlord hiding another junk fee, that's not just a billing issue or an ancillary income for some rich guy out of state. That's a paycheck that's stolen from a Marylander. And every time some family's belongings are in the street, as we said, that's dignity that's been denied. And so I'm asking you, as Carol did, and I'm challenging you to take this fight from the room and join us down in Annapolis where all this stuff happens. It can be uncomfortable, but we need you to bring your evidence, bring your stories, organize your testimony, because the more you speak, the more power we have to fight back against the moneyed interests who very much don't want things to get better for the people that we care about. And when those lobbyists say, slow down, which they say to me all the time, and when they say, as they did just yesterday, Vaughn, you're asking for too much, we will answer no. We're not going to slow down until every single Marylander has a safe, affordable, and dignified place to live. And so that's the mission, that's the mandate, and with your help and with some of the tools you're going to learn in the second panel, we're all going to make that happen together.
Delegate Stewart, I haven't had the opportunity to work with you, but you just opened the door that I will be sending you emails.
All right, come on in. Especially on